The courtroom door didn't just close, it crashed shut, a thunderclap tearing through the stifling air of Shelby County Circuit Court at 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late June. The Tennessee morning bore down with relentless humidity, clinging like a second skin, the sun scorching the old brick building into a sweatbox. Inside, 52 souls crowded splintered benches, defendants, families, onlookers, fanning themselves with dog-eared court notices, their whispers a low hum of frustration and dread. Deputies stood sentinel along the walls, their starched uniforms defying the heat, while lawyers darted between tables, briefcases spilling papers in chaotic disarray. At the heart of this restless hive loomed Judge Harold Grayson, perched behind his bench like a vulture, his gavel a scepter of unyielding dominion. Grayson, 68, was more than a judge. He was a force, a grizzled relic of a world that prized order over justice. His face, carved from granite, bore eyes that could freeze a man mid-sentence, honed by 3 decades of wielding power in this room. A Vietnam veteran who'd swapped jungle fatigues for a black robe, he viewed the courtroom as his final battlefield, a sacred ground where he reigned as general, judge, and executioner. In Murfreesboro, lawyers traded tales of his iron rule, jailing a man for a loud sneeze, fining a woman for weeping during her son's sentencing. To Grayson, rules were scripture, and he was the high priest, enforcing them with guillotine precision. Yet beneath this rigid exterior simmered a bias so deep it was muscle memory, a reflex that marked people like Nia Caldwell as threats to his meticulously constructed order. Nia sat in the second row, a quiet figure amid the storm, her presence unassuming yet resolute. She hadn't come to make waves. She'd driven 2 hours from Memphis, trading her office desk at Justice Now, a civil rights nonprofit, for this sticky bench, to support her nephew, Jamal Turner. At 22, Jamal was a lanky electrician's apprentice with a quick smile and a knack for fixing wires, a kid who'd never crossed the law until a cop turned a broken taillight into a life-altering trap. Nia didn't look the warrior today. Gray blouse, black slacks, flats, her hair pulled into a neat bun. But around her neck hung a silver chain, so thin it was nearly invisible, bearing a tiny cross. It wasn't a statement. It was her grandmother's last gift, a whisper of strength she'd carried since 18 through law school, trials, and every moment the world tried to break her. Today, it was just there, until Grayson made it something more. The bailiff's voice sliced through the din. "All rise." Grayson strode in, his gait stiff and deliberate, robe snapping like a flag in the wind. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and scanned the room with sniper-like precision, the air tightening under his gaze. Everyone knew what followed. Grayson's rulings were swift, his patience non-existent. But today his eyes locked onto Nia, a laser piercing the crowd. "Before we proceed," he rumbled, voice low and commanding, "I'll address a violation of decorum. You, in gray, stand." Nia's pulse quickened, a drumbeat in her chest, but she rose slowly, spine straight, face a mask of calm. She wasn't new to this, being singled out, sized up, dismissed. At 12, a teacher accused her of stealing a library book she'd checked out. At 25, a cop pulled her over for driving too slow in her own neighborhood. At 35, a senior partner called her articulate as if it were a shock. She'd learned to stand tall when others expected her to cower, to meet stares with steel. But this was unexpected. She'd come to be Jamal's rock, not Grayson's target. "You're wearing a religious symbol," Grayson said, tone sharp enough to cut glass. "That's forbidden in my courtroom. Neutrality is the law here. $50 fine for breaking decorum. Pay it at the clerk's desk or get out." The room froze, a collective breath held. A woman in the back shifted, her purse rustling. A man in a wrinkled tie paused, pen hovering over his notepad. Bailiff Tompkins, a broad-shouldered ex-Marine with a buzz cut and a permanent frown, twitched, hand brushing his belt, poised to act. Nia didn't blink. A fine for a necklace? It was laughable, yet the weight of it pressed down, an absurd power trip masquerading as principle. She'd faced worse, systemic gears grinding her down, petty slights stacking like bricks. But this was a new low. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady and measured, "is that a written policy? I'd like to see the statute or rule authorizing this fine." Grayson's eyes narrowed, a predator caught off guard by prey that didn't flee. "This is my courtroom," he snapped, leaning forward, his authority a wall he expected to hold. "I set the rules." Nia nodded, slow and deliberate, as if humoring a man teetering on the edge. "I respect that, sir. But are those rules posted anywhere, documented, for transparency?" It wasn't defiance, not yet. Just a probe, a scalpel testing his armor's depth. Grayson didn't flinch, but he didn't answer, unaccustomed to questions where obedience should suffice. "You can pay the fine or be held in contempt," he growled, voice dropping to a warning shot. "Choose." A soft gasp rippled through the gallery. The man in the tie scribbled faster, pen scratching like a pulse. Tompkins shifted, boots creaking, eyes darting between Nia and Grayson. The air thickened with unspoken stakes. Nia stood firm, exhaling once, a quiet release, and said, "I'm not leaving. I'm here for my nephew, Jamal Turner. He's on your docket today, and he asked me to be here. I'm not disrupting anything, Your Honor, but I believe this fine is baseless and likely unlawful." Grayson's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. "Are you challenging my authority?" His tone was venom, a dare to step fully into his ring. "I'm asking for the legal foundation of your decision," Nia replied, gaze locked on his, unflinching. "That's all?" The silence crackled, a live wire sparking tension. Grayson hadn't anticipated this, her poise, her pushback. He'd pegged her as a nobody, another body to bend, but now she stood as an unyielding wall he couldn't scale. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice tightening, a crack fissuring his facade. "My name is Nia Caldwell," she answered, words ringing clear and unshaken. "I'm a constitutional attorney, licensed in Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. I graduated from Yale Law in 2009, worked with the ACLU, and now serve as senior counsel at a civil rights nonprofit in Memphis. I'm here as family, but I know the law, and I know my rights." The courtroom didn't just shift, it shattered. Whispers erupted, a hiss of shock and awe. "Jesus!" someone muttered under their breath. Tompkins blinked, his scowl faltering. Ellis, the prosecutor, a lean man with a smirk that never reached his eyes, dropped his pen, smirk vanishing. Grayson's grip on the gavel tightened, knuckles whitening, but his eyes widened, rattled. A man who'd stepped into quicksand and felt it pull. He'd misjudged her, and the room sensed it, a seismic shift in power rippling through the benches. This wasn't about a necklace anymore. It was a collision. Grayson, the iron fist of a system designed to crush, against Nia, a woman who'd spent her life prying its fingers apart. Yet behind Grayson loomed Victor Langston, Shelby County's unseen puppeteer, a man who'd rigged the game for decades, bribing officials, stacking benches, keeping judges like Grayson as pawns to enforce his shadow empire. Langston wasn't present, but his influence threaded through every ruling, every fine, every life this court devoured. "Contempt it is," Grayson barked, slamming the gavel down, the sound a war cry echoing off the walls. "Bailiff, take her out." Tompkins hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his stern face, before stepping forward, boots heavy on the floor. Nia didn't budge. "Your Honor," she said, voice rising just enough to carry over the rising tide, "if you're removing me for exercising my rights, you're proving my point. There's no policy, no notice, no law, just prejudice." The word landed like a bomb. Prejudice. Not shouted, but a mirror held up to Grayson's flushed face. His cheeks reddened further, veins pulsing at his temples. "You're out of line!" he roared, voice cracking, a man losing his grip on the reins. The gallery stirred, a rumble of agreement, disbelief, defiance swelling. Nia had struck a match, and the room was tinder, ready to ignite. Nia Caldwell's fire wasn't sparked in the Shelby County courtroom. It was forged in the heavy, salt-laden air of Mobile, Alabama, where the Gulf's briny breath mingled with the ghosts of a city shackled to its past, a place where history clung like damp moss to every cracked sidewalk and leaning porch. In the summer of 1992, she was 9 years old, a skinny girl with knobby knees and a single braid swinging like a metronome, as she raced barefoot down the uneven asphalt of Davis Avenue. Her neighborhood was a patchwork quilt of hardship. Sagging shotgun houses with peeling paint, faded brick duplexes leaning into each other for support, their porches buckling under the weight of time and neglect. Her home sat at the end of a dirt lane, a narrow box of weathered wood shedding its sunburned skin in flakes, its tar paper-patched roof a fragile shield against the storms that rolled in from the coast. Inside, the walls were thin enough to carry every creak and sigh, the floors groaned underfoot, and the scent of grease and collards hung perpetually in the air. A living monument to her mother, Ruth's ceaseless struggle to keep their world from collapsing. Ruth was a woman of forged steel, her hands roughened by years of scrubbing floors at the Pineview nursing home, her eyes sharp with a quiet fury she rarely let spill over into words. She'd raised Nia and her older brother Marcus alone, since their father vanished when Nia was 4, leaving behind nothing but a half-empty bottle of Jim Beam on the kitchen counter, and a stack of unpaid bills that Ruth burned one night in a fit of silent rage. "You don't need a man to stand," she'd growl, her voice low and fierce as she kneaded dough for cornbread, or stitched a tear in Marcus's worn jeans, with a needle she wielded like a weapon. "You need a spine." Nia absorbed that lesson early, watching her mother bend under the weight of a world that seemed determined to crush her, double shifts that left her hands cracked and her back stooped, landlords who hiked rent on a whim, grocery bills that forced her to choose between meat and medicine. Yet Ruth never broke, her resolve a lighthouse in the storm of their lives. Marcus, 6 years her senior, was Nia's shield, a broad-shouldered boy whose laugh could cut through the thickest gloom, lighting up their block like a beacon. By 15, he'd taken on the role of man of the house, his hands already calloused from fixing leaks in their sagging roof, hauling heavy grocery bags from the corner store 2 miles away, and shooing off the neighborhood boys who mocked Nia's bookworm habit of lugging library tomes home in a frayed backpack too big for her frame. He wasn't flawless. He skipped school too often, drawn to the allure of the streets where older kids smoked behind the gas station, their pockets jingling with switchblades and bravado. But he was hers, a constant presence who'd hoist her onto his shoulders to watch the 4th of July fireworks explode over the Mobile River when Ruth was too weary to leave the house after a 12-hour shift. "You're gonna be something, Nia," he'd say, ruffling her hair with a grin that showed a chipped front tooth from a fight he wouldn't talk about. "Something big." That dream shattered on a muggy night in August 1995, when Marcus was 18 and Nia was 12. The air so thick with humidity it felt like breathing through a wet rag. He'd been at a porch party, just kids gathered around a boombox, a few beers passed in brown paper bags, the kind of gathering that dotted Mobile's summer nights like fireflies. The cops rolled up, lights flashing, sirens cutting through the bass thump of the music. Someone had a joint, Nia never knew who, and it didn't matter. Officer Hargrove, a white man with a buzz cut and a sneer that curled his lip like a permanent scar, didn't care whose it was. He saw Marcus, tall, black, standing out in the dim glow of the porch light, and that was enough. A routine pat-down turned into a shove when Marcus asked, "What's this for?" His voice steady, but edged with the defiance of youth. The shove became cuffs when he stumbled back, Hargrove barking, "Resisting!" as if the word were a weapon he'd been itching to use. By dawn, Marcus was in county lockup, facing possession charges for a joint Nia would swear until her dying day wasn't his. Ruth scraped together $200 from her meager savings, money meant for a new water heater, and handed it to a public defender, a harried man in a cheap suit who smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes, his eyes barely lifting from his stack of files as he muttered, "We'll see what we can do." In court, the judge, a gray-haired fossil with a face like weathered stone, didn't flinch when Hargrove claimed he'd found the joint in Marcus's pocket. His testimony delivered with the casual certainty of a man who'd never been questioned. No one asked why the evidence bag was unsealed when it reached the courtroom, its edges frayed like it had been handled too many times, or why Hargrove's partner, a younger officer with darting eyes, stayed silent, his head bowed as if avoiding the truth. 3 years, the gavel decreed, a sound that cracked through Nia's chest like a gunshot, sentencing Marcus for a crime that might not have been his, a punishment that felt less like justice and more like a ritual sacrifice to a system that thrived on such offerings. Nia sat in the gallery that day, her small hands clenched in her lap, the silver cross her grandmother had pressed into her palm 2 years earlier, on a hospital bed where cancer had already claimed victory, digging into her skin until it left a red imprint. She didn't cry, not then, not in front of the judge or Hargrove or the gallery's hushed onlookers. She watched Marcus's shoulders slump, his broad frame shrinking as the bailiff led him away, his eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment, a silent plea she couldn't answer. She watched Ruth's face harden into stone, her mother's fury locked behind a mask of silence, her hands gripping the bench until her knuckles blanched. She watched the system chew her brother up and spit him out like he was nothing, a number on a docket, a statistic in a ledger, a life discarded without a second glance. A month later, word trickled back through the neighborhood grapevine. Tommy Brewer, a white kid from the north side, had been caught with the same half-gram of weed, his blonde hair and easy grin a stark contrast to Marcus's coiled strength. Probation, no jail. Nia overheard it from a classmate at the corner store, her fingers tightening around a bag of rice until it nearly split. She saw Tommy a week later at the mall, laughing with his buddies over a milkshake, his freedom a slap in the face she couldn't dodge. That's when it crystallized for her. The law wasn't blind. It saw color with ruthless clarity, and Marcus's shade marked him as prey while Tommy's let him walk. The realization wasn't a shout in her mind, but a quiet, smoldering ember, one that would grow into a fire she'd carry for years. That night, back in their creaking house, Nia slipped into her room, a closet-sized space with a sagging mattress and a single bulb flickering overhead, and pulled a dog-eared copy of the U.S. Constitution from the stack of library books under her bed. She'd checked it out months earlier on a whim, drawn by the big words adults tossed around. Justice, liberty, rights. Words that sounded like promises but felt hollow in her world. Now, it was more than curiosity. It was a lifeline, a rope to pull herself out of the despair threatening to swallow her. She sat cross-legged on the floor, flashlight in hand, the bulb too dim to read by, her finger tracing the amendments like they were a map out of hell. The Fourth Amendment promised protection against unreasonable searches, a shield Marcus never got. The Fifth guaranteed due process, a right the public defender hadn't fought for. The 14th vowed equal protection, a lie Tommy's probation mocked. The words burned into her, not with a roar but with a deep, unyielding smolder, a quiet fire that took root in her chest. She was 12, and she'd already decided. If the law could break Marcus with such casual cruelty, she'd learn its language, master its rules, and break it back. Half a state away, in a world of rigid lines and unyielding order, Harold Grayson was carving a different path through the chaos of his own making. In 1971, at 24, he was a sergeant in the jungles of Vietnam, his M16 slung over his shoulder, barking orders through the relentless din of gunfire, mud, and the screams of men who'd never see home. War had shaped him into something hard and unbendable, a man who saw existence as a binary, friend or foe, rule or ruin, order or collapse. He'd grown up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, under the shadow of a factory foreman father whose knuckles bore the bruises of the mill and whose belt bore the marks of discipline enforced with a biblical fervor. "Life's a chain of command," his father would rasp, voice rough from years of shouting over machinery, his hand heavy on Grayson's shoulder, or, when disobeyed, across his back. "You follow or you fall." Grayson followed. He returned from Vietnam in 1973 with a Purple Heart pinned to his chest and a visceral hatred for disorder etched into his bones. The jungle's chaos a nightmare he'd vowed never to relive. The GI Bill sent him to law school, a path he took not out of passion, but necessity. A means to impose structure on a civilian world he saw slipping into weakness and entropy. By 1985, he was a prosecutor in Shelby County, his courtroom presence a wall of ice. Ruthless, precise, unyielding, his arguments delivered with the clipped efficiency of a military briefing. He climbed to the bench in 1992 at 45, his black robe a second skin, a mantle that transformed him from soldier to sovereign. To him, the law wasn't about fairness or nuance. It was about control, a bulwark against the anarchy he'd fought in Nam and the softness he despised in peacetime. He didn't see race consciously, didn't pause to question why so many of his threats wore skin darker than his own. He saw only disruptions to his grid, deviations from his chain of command, and in Shelby County, those disruptions often bore faces like Nia's. Grayson's ascent wasn't entirely his own doing. He was a cog in a machine he never fully saw, oiled by the hands of Victor Langston, a shadow who'd watched him rise with a predator's patience. Langston was Murfreesboro's unseen king, a man who'd turned a failing hardware store into a sprawling web of influence by the late 1980s. Bald, wiry, with eyes that glinted like a snake's under the dim light of his pawn shop office, he didn't flaunt power in the way of politicians or preachers. He wielded it quietly, coldly, from a corner room above a storefront, cluttered with pawned guitars and tarnished jewelry. His ledger was his scepter, a meticulous map of debts and favors that stretched across Shelby County like a spider's web, each thread a transaction, bribes to cops for protection on the west side, kickbacks to councilmen for zoning votes that turned black neighborhoods into profit zones for his developer allies, quiet envelopes slipped to judges to ensure the right ruling stuck. Langston had started small in the early 70s, a hustler with a knack for spotting leverage, a cop who liked gambling too much, a clerk with a drinking problem. But by the time Grayson took the bench in '92, he was the county's puppet master, a king who ruled without a crown. He didn't seek office or shake hands in public. He preferred the shadows, his power exercised through whispers and nods, his presence felt in the outcomes he engineered. He liked Grayson, liked his rigidity, his predictability. The way his military-bred sense of order made him a perfect pawn. A quiet donation to a judicial campaign here, a whispered tip about a troublemaker needing a heavy sentence there, and Grayson's rulings began to align with Langston's interests. Harsher penalties for petty crimes in black neighborhoods that kept residents scared and property values low. Lighter sentences for connected white families whose fathers golfed with Langston's cronies. Zoning decisions that paved the way for strip malls and condos on land. Langston's allies snapped up cheap. Grayson didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He thought he was upholding order, preserving the chain of command his father had beaten into him, and Vietnam had seared into his soul. Langston knew he was building a machine, one that ran on fear, profit, and the quiet compliance of men like Grayson, who never looked too closely at the gears. Nia's machine was different. It was defiance, a mechanism of resistance built from the wreckage of Marcus's fall. After that courtroom day in 1995, she turned inward, her natural curiosity hardening into a resolve as unyielding as her mother's. School became her battleground, a proving ground where she could arm herself against the system that had taken her brother. At 15, she aced every class at Carver Middle School, her hand always up, her answers sharp enough to make teachers blink and classmates whisper, sometimes in awe, sometimes in resentment. She'd walk home with her backpack sagging under the weight of library books, history, civics, anything with a spine thick enough to hold answers, ignoring the taunts of bookworm from boys who didn't understand why she'd rather read than flirt. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Platt, a tired woman with graying hair and a desk piled with unopened files, laughed when Nia confided her dream at a mandatory meeting in the spring of 1997. "A lawyer? That's a big dream, honey," Platt said, her tone dripping with pity, her eyes flicking to Nia's frayed sneakers and secondhand dress. "Law school's tough, competitive, expensive. Maybe nursing's more your speed, something practical." Nia didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line, and went home to study harder, her nights a blur of textbooks and lamplight, the silver cross around her neck, a silent vow to prove Platt wrong. Marcus came home in the summer of 1998, a shadow of the boy who'd left, a thinner, quieter version, his laugh extinguished by 3 years in a concrete cell. Prison had hollowed him out, carved scars Nia couldn't see but felt in every flinch at a loud noise, every averted gaze when she asked about his time inside. He got a job at a warehouse on the edge of town, hauling boxes for minimum wage, his felony record a chain that kept better doors locked shut. Nia was 17, a junior at Murphy High, applying to colleges with a ferocity that left her teachers stunned when Marcus sat her down one humid night in their kitchen, the air thick with the scent of Ruth's gumbo simmering on the stove. He'd been home 6 months, his hands rougher now, his eyes older than his 24 years. "Don't let him take you too," he said, voice rough as gravel, his fingers tracing a crack in the table where he'd once carved his initials as a kid. "You fight, Nia. You hear me? Fight him with everything you got." She nodded, tears burning her eyes but not falling, and mailed her Yale application the next day, her handwriting steady despite the tremor in her chest. Yale was a war zone of its own, a battlefield of privilege and power. She stormed in the fall of 2005 at 19, a black girl from Mobile thrust into a sea of trust fund kids with prep school polish and professors who looked past her in seminars as if she were invisible. The campus sprawled before her, Ivy-clad buildings, manicured lawns, a world of wealth she'd only seen in library books, but the whispers followed her like shadows. Diversity hire, affirmative action baby, hissed behind cupped hands when she outscored her peers on midterms. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink. She claimed the front row in every constitutional law class, her notebook a fortress of meticulous notes, her questions a blade honed by years of reading alone. "Why does the Fourth Amendment fail black communities?" she asked Professor Linden in her second semester, her voice calm but piercing, cutting through the lecture hall's stale air. He stammered, unprepared for the challenge, his chalk pausing mid-scrawl on the board. She didn't smile at his discomfort, just wrote down his fumbling non-answer and kept going, her resolve a quiet storm, building strength. She graduated in 2009, top 10% of her class, her name etched in Yale Law's records with a precision that silenced the whispers. Big firms came calling, New York towers offering six-figure salaries, corner offices with views, but she turned them down flat, their glossy promises hollow against the memory of Marcus's slumped shoulders and Ruth's cracked hands. She didn't want corporate suites, she wanted the trenches, the front lines where the law met flesh and blood. The ACLU took her in, sending her to Birmingham in 2010 to defend minors caught in a rigged system, black men jailed for striking against unsafe conditions, white bosses walking free with smiles and handshakes. She spent 3 years there, her days a grind of depositions and appeals, her nights poring over case law in a cramped apartment with a leaking faucet she never had time to fix. In 2015, she moved to Memphis, joining Justice Now, a nonprofit fighting housing discrimination and police overreach, her caseload a blur of evictions, bail funds, and pro bono battles against cops like Hargrove who'd broken Marcus years before. She didn't chase fame, no magazine covers, no Twitter clout, just results. Families kept in homes, kids freed from cells, lives bent back into shape one motion at a time. The Silver Cross stayed with her, a tether to Marcus, to Ruth, to the girl who'd read the Constitution by flashlight, its weight a reminder of why she fought. Jamal's arrest wasn't random. It was a replay of the script Nia knew too well, a page torn from Marcus's story, with a new name inked in. On a Friday night, May 28th, he'd been driving home from a 12-hour shift at an electrical supply warehouse, his '98 Honda rattling down a back road in Shelby County, its engine coughing from years of wear. The taillight was out. He'd noticed it that morning, planned to fix it Saturday with a spare bulb he kept in the glove box. But the cop who pulled him over didn't care about a flickering light. Officer Dale Pruitt was a Langston man, a beefy ex-linebacker with a rap sheet of complaints he'd never answered for. Excessive force, profiling, evidence tampering, each swept under the rug by a system that protected its own. Pruitt patrolled the West Side, a black neighborhood Langston wanted cleaned up for a developer buddy, eyeing cheap land to flip into condos and strip malls. Stops like Jamal's were routine, a playbook Langston had perfected. Harass, search, charge, repeat, keeping residents scared, property values low, and his profits high. Pruitt's flashlight stabbed into Jamal's face through the cracked driver's window, his voice a bark that echoed Hargrove's from years past. "Out of the car!" Jamal complied, hands raised, voice steady despite the late hour and his aching muscles. "What's this about, sir?" he asked, polite but firm, a question Marcus might have posed. Pruitt didn't answer, just shoved him against the hood, the metal cold against Jamal's chest, and patted him down with rough hands. No drugs, no weapons, nothing but a wallet and a pack of gum. Then Pruitt reached into his own pocket, pulled out a baggie, half a gram of weed, its plastic crinkling in the night air, and tossed it into Jamal's car through the open window. "Looks like possession to me," he said, smirking, his eyes glinting with the satisfaction of a hunter bagging easy prey. Jamal protested. "That's not mine," his voice rising in panic, and Pruitt snapped the cuffs on, adding, resisting, when Jamal instinctively pulled his arm back from the sudden grip, a reflex born of shock, not defiance. The arrest report was a lie, typed up with the casual precision of a man who'd done it before. Subject resisted, contraband found in plain view. No body cam footage, Pruitt claimed it malfunctioned, a convenient glitch that left no evidence to contradict his word. The public defender assigned to Jamal, a young woman fresh out of law school with a caseload too heavy to bear, barely read the file, muttering about a plea deal over a cup of vending machine coffee when she met him at the county jail. Nia got the call from Ruth on Saturday morning, her mother's voice tight with the same panic she'd carried in '95. "They got Jamal, Nia. You gotta help him?" Nia didn't hesitate. She grabbed her keys, the silver cross glinting in her rearview mirror, as she drove the 2 hours from Memphis to Shelby County, her mind already racing through statutes and precedents, her heart pounding with the echo of Marcus's fall. She met Jamal in lockup on Sunday afternoon, the jail's fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on his face, eyes red from crying, hands shaking as they gripped the edge of the metal table between them. He was 22, the same age Marcus had been when he got out. But where Marcus had been hardened, Jamal was still soft, his lanky frame hunched in a faded orange jumpsuit, his quick smile nowhere to be seen. "I didn't do it, Aunt Nia," he said, voice breaking, a sob catching in his throat like a trapped bird. "He set me up. I swear, I didn't have nothing." She believed him, not just because he was family, not just because his eyes held the same desperate honesty Marcus's had, but because she'd seen this script play out too many times before, a rerun of injustice with a new cast. Marcus's ghost hovered in the cell, his slumped shoulders superimposed over Jamal's, a reminder of what happened when the system smelled blood and found a black body to spill it from. Nia sat across from him, her gray blouse crisp despite the drive, her notebook open, pen poised like a weapon. She pulled the arrest report from the file the guard had slid under the plexiglass window, her eyes scanning it with the precision of a surgeon dissecting a lie. The holes were glaring, no warrant mentioned, no consent recorded. A malfunctioning body cam that left Pruitt's word unchallenged, timestamps that didn't align with the call log she'd already requested from Jamal's phone records. She'd seen this before in Birmingham, in Memphis, in every case where the law bent to fit a cop's story rather than the truth. By midnight that Sunday, back in her Memphis apartment, a one-bedroom walk-up with peeling wallpaper and a desk piled with case files, she drafted a motion to dismiss, her pen flying across the page, her resolve a wall against history's cruel repetition. She cited Tennessee v. Garner for excessive force limits, State v. Mitchell for warrantless search violations, State v. Holloway for evidence integrity. Each precedent a brick in the fortress she built to free Jamal and strike back at the machine that had taken Marcus. Grayson didn't know Jamal, didn't care to. He was a docket number, a disruption to squash, a speck in the orderly grid he'd spent decades enforcing. Langston didn't know Jamal either, didn't need to. Jamal was a means to an end, another pawn in the West Side's quiet subjugation, another arrest to keep property cheap and his developers happy. But Nia knew them both, knew Grayson's courtroom was a stage where justice played second fiddle to control, knew Langston's hand pulled strings from the shadows, a puppeteer whose empire thrived on men like Pruitt and judges like Grayson. She'd walked into that courtroom on Monday, June 28th, expecting to sit quietly, to be Jamal's anchor as he faced a system stacked against him. Now, she was in the ring, gloves off, facing a judge who saw her as a threat, and a fixer who'd killed to keep his game alive, a game she'd been training to dismantle since the day Marcus was taken. The stakes weren't just Jamal's freedom anymore. They were Marcus's ghost whispering in her ear, Ruth's tears staining her memory, the fire that had smoldered in Nia since she was 12 now blazing bright. They were a system built to break black bodies and spirits, and a woman built to fight back, armed with law, history, and a cross that held her steady. Grayson's gavel hung in the air, poised to strike. Langston's shadow loomed unseen but ever present, and Nia stood ready, calm, sharp, unstoppable, her past a foundation, her present a battlefield, her future a promise to rewrite the script that had stolen so much. By 10:15 a.m., the Shelby County Circuit Court had transformed into a furnace, the air so thick with humidity and tension that it pressed against the lungs of every soul within its walls. The old brick building seemed to groan under the weight of the June heat. The courtroom's 52 occupants, defendants, families, onlookers, packed onto splintered benches, their makeshift fans of crumpled court notices fluttering futilely against the sweat beating on their brows. At the center of this sweltering crucible stood Nia Caldwell, her gray blouse clinging to her back, her posture a pillar of steel amid the chaos she'd ignited. Judge Harold Grayson sat behind his elevated bench, his once impenetrable mask of granite fracturing at the edges, his gavel resting in a hand that trembled ever so slightly. A weapon he'd wielded for decades now feeling foreign, uncertain. The confrontation had begun at 9:47 when Grayson fined Nia $50 for the silver cross at her neck, a petty flex of power that had backfired spectacularly. She'd refused to bend, revealing herself as a Yale-trained constitutional attorney, her calm defiance a crack in his fortress of control. "Contempt it is," he'd barked, ordering Bailiff Tompkins to remove her. But Nia hadn't flinched. Her words, "You're proving my point," a gunshot still ringing in the room. Tompkins had hesitated, and in that pause, Nia seized the moment, stepping forward with a voice that cut through the rising storm like a blade. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to represent Jamal Turner. I've reviewed his charges, spoken with him, and he's asked me to stand in his defense. I'm licensed and prepared." The room tilted on its axis, a seismic shift felt in every gasp and widened eye. Grayson's jaw tightened, a vein pulsing at his temple like a warning drumbeat. "You're not on record," he snapped, his voice a desperate grasp at the reins slipping from his grip, his fingers curling tighter around the gavel as if it could anchor him. Nia reached into her purse with deliberate calm, pulling out her bar card and holding it aloft like a shield, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the courtroom's fraying order. Nia Elise Caldwell, Tennessee Bar Association, active status. Verify it with the Board of Professional Responsibility if you need to. License number 024681. Her tone was even, unyielding, a quiet storm rolling in with the inevitability of thunder. Grayson stared at the card, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the gavel, his mind racing to reconcile the woman he'd dismissed as a mere spectator with this legal force now standing before him. He'd misjudged her, catastrophically, and the trap she'd laid was snapping shut, its jaws closing around his authority. Prosecutor Ellis shifted in his seat, a wiry man whose perpetual smirk never reached his cold eyes, sensing the ground quake beneath his flimsy case. Tompkins froze mid-step, his broad frame a statue caught between duty and doubt, his hand hovering near his belt as if unsure whether to draw it back or press forward. The gallery held its breath, 52 pairs of eyes darting between Nia and Grayson, the air electric with anticipation. "Proceed," Grayson muttered, the words sour in his mouth, a concession he couldn't claw back, his voice betraying the strain of a man cornered by his own hubris. Nia stepped beside Jamal at the defendant's table, her nephew's rumpled shirt hanging off his lanky frame, his wide eyes a mix of fear and fragile hope as he looked up at her. She placed a steady hand on his shoulder, an anchor in the storm, and faced the bench, her voice ringing clear, cutting through the stifling heat like a blade through flesh. Jamal Turner was stopped on May 28th for a non-functioning taillight on Shelby County Road 17. Officer Dale Pruitt ordered him out of the vehicle, searched him without consent or a warrant, and claimed to find a baggie of marijuana, half a gram, in plain view on the passenger seat. When Jamal questioned the search, Pruitt cuffed him, adding a resisting arrest charge. "I've filed a motion to dismiss, supported by Tennessee v. Garner, State v. Mitchell, and State v. Holloway, each affirming that a warrantless search without probable cause violates the Fourth Amendment. There's no body cam footage to back Pruitt's story. He claims it malfunctioned, a pattern in his 6 prior complaints. This isn't justice, Your Honor. It's a setup, executed with intent to frame an innocent man." Her motion cut deep, each word a scalpel slicing through the lies Pruitt had stitched together, exposing the raw, bleeding truth beneath. Grayson took the document from the clerk, his hands trembling as he scanned the pages, his eyes flicking over the precedents, Garner limiting police force, Mitchell striking down baseless searches, Holloway demanding evidence integrity, the airtight logic Nia had woven in a single midnight session after meeting Jamal in lockup. Ellis leaned forward, his smirk faltering, fingers twitching as he realized his house of cards was teetering, the flimsy report he'd relied on crumbling under Nia's precision. The gallery leaned in too, their makeshift fans stilled, hooked not just on the law, but on the woman delivering it. Nia wasn't loud, wasn't theatrical. She was a surgeon, her words dissecting the prosecution's narrative with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Jamal's freedom hung in the balance, but this was bigger. Marcus's ghost lingered in her voice. Ruth's tears fueled her resolve, and every black kid the system had swallowed, Hull stood behind her in silent witness. Grayson, whether he saw it or not, was the face of that machine, his bench its throne. Victor Langston didn't sit in courtrooms. He didn't need to. At 10:20 a.m., he sat in his pawnshop lair on Murfreesboro's east side, the world outside filtered through a cracked window, his bald head gleaming under a flickering bulb, his fingers tapping a ledger that mapped his shadow empire. He'd built it brick by brick, bribes to cops, favors to judges, threats to those who crossed him, turning Shelby County into his chessboard, where men like Grayson were pawns and Pruitt a rook, moving where Langston pointed to keep the West Side scared and the land ripe for his developers' greed. His phone buzzed, a burner on his cluttered desk, and Eddie's voice crackled through, a janitor who swept floors and eavesdropped for cash. "Some lawyer chick's tearing it up in Grayson's room," Eddie whispered, voice tinny with urgency. "Black lady, says she's from Yale, got the judge sweating bullets." Langston's eyes narrowed, a snake sizing up prey he hadn't anticipated. He didn't know Nia Caldwell, not yet, but he knew trouble when he smelled it. Grayson was supposed to squash disruptions, not let them flare into wildfires. Pruitt's stop was meant to be clean. Another kid locked up, another statistic to keep the West Side in line, another profit point in his ledger. If this lawyer chick was digging, she'd unearth dirt, and Langston didn't tolerate dirt he couldn't bury. He dialed Pruitt, his voice a low hiss that could curdle blood. "You said the kid was easy. What's this about a lawyer?" Pruitt stammered, bravado crumbling under Langston's glare, even across the line. "She's his aunt or something. Came out of nowhere. I didn't—" Langston cut him off, patience snapping. "Shut her down. Get someone in there. Now." Pruitt knew the drill. Langston didn't abide loose ends. By 10:30, a plan was in motion. A witness, a lie, a desperate bid to bury Nia's motion under fabricated truth. Back in the courtroom, Grayson's composure frayed, thread by thread, as he set the motion down, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the bench, eyes darting to Nia like she was a riddle unraveling his reign. "You wrote this yourself?" he asked, tone laced with disbelief and accusation, her competence a personal affront. "I did," Nia replied, unflinching under his scrutiny, voice steady as bedrock. "Last night, after reviewing the arrest report and speaking with Jamal, it's all there. Facts, law, precedent. And you're not with a firm," Grayson pressed, clawing for a flaw to reclaim his footing. "Senior counsel at Justice Now, a civil rights nonprofit in Memphis," she said, her words a quiet thunder rolling through the room. "We fight due process violations, housing discrimination, wrongful convictions. This is my work." The gallery buzzed, a low hum of awe sparking among those who'd underestimated her. Grayson's face twitched, the fissure widening. "State's position," he snapped at Ellis. Ellis hesitated, fingers drumming, smirk gone. "We'd drop the resisting charge, keep possession and the traffic infraction," he said, voice oily, a retreat masked as strategy. Nia's eyes didn't waver. "Only if the court acknowledges the search was unlawful," she countered, firm and unapologetic. "Jamal deserves that on record. No probable cause, no consent, no evidence beyond Pruitt's word." Grayson flared. "You're accusing perjury?" "Facts," Nia shot back, steady and sharp. "Inconsistent report, missing footage, Pruitt's complaint history, check it." The room gasped, Tompkins tensed, Ellis squirmed. Then the door creaked open. A scruffy man, mid-30s, in a stained jacket shuffled in, nervous eyes darting. "Your Honor, I got something to say," he stammered. "Name's Bobby Ray. Saw Turner toss a baggie that night." The gallery erupted. "Bullshit," a woman yelled. "Pruitt's cousin," a man roared, pointing. Nia's gaze snapped to him, recognizing Langston's pawn. "Recess, verify him," she demanded, voice slicing through. Grayson's gavel slammed. "Order!" Failing as chaos surged, racial fault lines splitting wide. He fled to chambers, Nia strategizing, Sarah digging. Carl confirmed Bobby Ray's ties. Tompkins broke. "I'll testify. He's Pruitt's." At 11, Grayson returned, defeated, shoulders slumped. Nia pressed. "Strike Bobby Ray. Dismiss it all." "Granted," he rasped, charges gone. Jamal sobbed, hugging her. The gallery exploded in triumph. Nia eyed the door. Langston's shadow lingered, the war far from won. The sun dipped low over Shelby County at 4:37 p.m. a blood-orange disk sinking into a haze that cast long, jagged shadows across the courthouse parking lot. Hours earlier, Nia Caldwell had dismantled Judge Harold Grayson's courtroom, securing her nephew Jamal Turner's freedom and exposing a crack in a system that stretched from Officer Dale Pruitt's badge to Victor Langston's shadowy ledger. The air buzzed with the aftermath. Reporters lingered near the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing like fireflies, while clusters of onlookers from the gallery milled about, their voices a volatile mix of triumph and simmering fury. Nia stepped out into the humid dusk, her gray blouse damp with the sweat of a battle won, her purse slung over her shoulder, Jamal trailing close behind. His rumpled shirt hung loose on his lanky frame, his eyes still red from tears shed in relief, but a faint smile tugged at his lips, a fragile glimmer of hope amidst a storm that hadn't yet broken. "You sure you're okay to drive?" Nia asked, her voice soft but firm, an aunt's concern piercing through the armor of the lawyer who'd just toppled a courtroom king. Jamal nodded, rubbing the back of his neck with a shaky hand. "Yeah, Aunt Nia. I just want to get home, sleep this off, wash it away." She squeezed his arm, a silent promise of safety, then turned toward her car, a battered 2012 Toyota Corolla parked in the lot's far corner, its faded blue paint a testament to years of Memphis commutes, its dents and scratches a map of her relentless fight. The sight stopped her cold, a jolt of ice slicing through her chest. The driver's side window was shattered, glass glinting on the asphalt like scattered teeth, jagged edges catching the dying light. Across the hood, scratched deep into the metal with a blade's cruel precision, were the words, "Back off, bitch." Nia's breath caught, but her face remained steady, a mask of calm she'd worn since Mobile, honed through years of facing down threats subtler and sharper than this. Jamal froze beside her, his voice a whisper, barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. "What the hell?" Nia circled the car, her flats crunching glass into dust, her eyes scanning the wreckage with a clinical detachment, slashed tires sagging into useless rubber, a dented door buckled inward as if struck by a fist or a bat. The rear windshield cracked into a spiderweb pattern that threatened to collapse with the next gust. This wasn't random vandalism, not the work of a bored delinquent or a petty grudge. It was a message, sharp and personal, delivered with the cold intent of a predator marking its prey. Langston's signature was etched into every cut and scratch, a warning from a man who thrived on fear. She pulled out her phone, snapping photos with the same steady hand that had held her bar card aloft hours earlier, her mind already cataloging the threat, time, location, potential witnesses among the scattering crowd. "Stay here," she told Jamal, her tone leaving no room for debate, then dialed 911, voice flat as she reported it. "Vandalism, Shelby County Courthouse lot, blue Toyota Corolla, license plate TNX 492, suspect unknown." The dispatcher's rote promise of a patrol in 20 minutes rang hollow. Nia knew Pruitt's cronies on the force wouldn't rush to aid the woman who just humiliated one of their own. She glanced back at the courthouse, its brick facade looming like a silent witness, and caught Sarah Hensley's sharp gaze from the entrance steps, cigarette in hand, her reporter's instincts already flaring. Sarah jogged over, notepad clutched like a weapon, her eyes widening as she took in the wreckage. "Jesus, Nia, what happened?" "Someone doesn't like losing," Nia replied, her voice dry as desert sand, handing Sarah her phone to display the photos, each frame a testament to the cost of her victory. "Get this in your story. They're scared, and they're showing it." Sarah's eyes narrowed, a hunter locking onto a scent, her pen poised over the pad. "Langston," she guessed, voice low, the name a dart thrown at a shadowy target. "Prove it," Nia challenged, not a confirmation but a gauntlet tossed at Sarah's feet, her gaze steady and unyielding. Sarah nodded, pocketing the phone pics, her mind already racing with angles. Vandalism as retaliation. A pattern of intimidation stretching from the courtroom to the streets. A thread leading back to Langston's web of influence. "I'll dig," she said, then hesitated, her tone dropping to a whisper laced with concern. "Watch your back, okay? This isn't a bluff." Nia gave a tight nod, the silver cross at her neck catching the last rays of sunlight as she turned to Jamal. "Let's get you home. I'll handle this." They walked to his beat-up Honda, the only vehicle spared in the lot's quiet chaos, and drove off, the courthouse shrinking in the rearview mirror. But the weight of those words, "back off, bitch," clung to her like a shadow, a tangible echo of Langston's reach, a threat she couldn't shake as the miles stretched between Shelby County and Memphis. By 8 p.m., Nia was back in her Memphis apartment, a modest one-bedroom walk-up with peeling wallpaper and a kitchen table buried under legal files. Her car sat at a garage, its wreckage a problem for tomorrow, her mind a battlefield of strategy and exhaustion. She sat with a chipped mug of tea cooling beside her laptop, the screen casting a pale glow on her face as she scrolled through the day's notes. Jamal's victory, Grayson's collapse, the gallery's roar still ringing in her ears. Her phone buzzed, the nonprofit's office number flashing, and she answered, knowing who it would be. Denise Carter's voice crackled through, a wiry woman with a smoker's rasp and a heart of tempered steel, her tone sharp with worry. "You're stirring a hornet's nest, Nia. That courtroom stunt? Langston's not some street punk. He's got reach, deep and wide." "I know," Nia said, fingers tracing the cross at her neck, a reflex born of restless nights when the weight of her fight pressed hardest. "But we don't stop. Jamal's free, but Pruitt's still out there, badge and all. And whoever's pulling his strings isn't done. They're just starting." Denise sighed, a sound heavy with the weariness of years spent battling losing wars against systems too big to topple. "Got a heads up from accounting, state's launching an audit on justice now. Tax records, grants, every damn dime we've touched since 15. Notice hit this afternoon, expedited, no warning, smells like retaliation, pure and simple." Nia's stomach tightened, a knot of anger and dread twisting beneath her ribs. Justice Now ran on a shoestring, legal aid for tenants facing eviction, bail funds for kids like Jamal caught in the system's jaws, advocacy against cops like Pruitt, who wielded badges as weapons. An audit wasn't a random bureaucratic hiccup. It was a chokehold, Langston's influence flexing through state channels to strangle her work before it could spread. "They're trying to bury us," she said, voice low, controlled, masking the fury simmering beneath. "Tie us up in red tape, drain our funds, kill us slow." "Yep," Denise replied, her tone grim as a gravedigger's. "They've done it before. Hit the ACLU branch here in 18, crippled them for a year with fines and frozen accounts. We've got 3 days to prep, or they'll lock our bank, shut us down cold." Nia leaned back, her chair creaking under her weight, her mind racing like a chess master, plotting moves against an unseen foe. "I'll handle it," she said, resolve hardening her words. "Pull the books, call our donors, quietly, no panic. We fight this like we fight everything else, with facts, with proof, with grit." She hung up, staring at the laptop, the motion she'd filed for Jamal glowing on the screen. A victory that had drawn blood, and now Langston was striking back, not just at her car, but at her life's work, a calculated bid to silence her voice and the voices she lifted. But silence wasn't in her blood. It never had been. Victor Langston didn't sleep much, his nights spent in the dim glow of his pawnshop office, the world outside reduced to a quiet hum of crickets and passing headlights. At 9:15 p.m., he sat behind a fortress of a desk, ledgers stacked like battle plans, burner phones scattered like grenades, a half-empty bottle of bourbon glinting beside a wad of cash tied with a rubber band. The call from Pruitt had come at 6 souse, the cop's voice a cocktail of panic and defiance, his breath ragged over the line. "She got the kid off, Vic. Charges dropped, everything. Bobby Ray flopped hard. The gallery ate him alive, called him out as my cousin right there." Langston's fingers stilled on the ledger, his eyes narrowing to slits, a snake coiling before the strike. "And the car?" he asked, voice a hiss that carried the weight of a death sentence. "Done," Pruitt said, a smirk audible despite his nerves. "Smashed it good, windows, tires, carved it up. She'll think twice now, back off." Langston didn't smile. His lips remained a thin, hard line, his mind already shifting gears. "She won't," he said, cutting the line with a flick of his thumb, his gaze drifting to the cracked window where Murfreesboro's lights flickered like distant stars. Nia Caldwell wasn't a petty thug to scare off with broken glass. She was a lawyer, a Yale grad, a woman who'd turned Grayson's courtroom into a circus and walked out with her nephew's freedom and Pruitt's dignity in tatters. The vandalism was a jab, a warning shot, but the audit was his real move, a favor called in from a state revenue clerk who owed him $20,000 from a backroom poker game gone sour. It wasn't enough, though. He needed her broken, not just bruised, her non-profit gutted, her reputation muddied beyond repair. He dialed another number, the line crackling as Ronnie Tate's gravelly voice answered on the second ring. A fixer with a rap sheet longer than Langston's ledger. A man who thrived on dirty work. "Ronnie," Langston said, tone smooth as oil sliding over a blade. "Got a job. Lawyer named Caldwell, Memphis. Runs Justice Now, a non-profit. Dig deep. Clients, cases, anything we can twist, anything to make her bleed. Keep it quiet, no tracks." "On it," Ronnie grunted, the line going dead with a click. Langston poured a shot of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the dim light, swirling it in his glass as his mind mapped the next play. Nia was a threat, a pebble in his shoe that had grown into a boulder, and he'd crush her before she rolled him over, before her courtroom win sparked a fire he couldn't douse. Grayson didn't go home after court, the weight of the day pinning him to his chambers like a prisoner in a cell. At 10 p.m., he sat in the dim light, a tumbler of scotch untouched on his desk. The room, a mausoleum of his past, law books lining the walls like silent sentinels. A faded American flag from Vietnam propped in the corner, a black and white photo of his father glaring from the shelf with the stern judgment of a man who'd never bent. His hands shook as he pulled a file from a locked drawer, the paper yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but legible. State v. Darnell Brooks, 1995. A black kid, 17, accused of stealing a car stereo from a white man's pickup on the west side. A flimsy case, a fingerprint that didn't quite match, a witness half drunk and unreliable. Langston's voice had come over the phone that night, smooth and insistent. "Order, Harold. We need order. Nip this one. Troublemaker." Grayson hadn't dug, hadn't questioned. He'd sentenced Darnell to 2 years, kept his bench, kept his world intact. The boy's mother had sobbed in the gallery, a sound he'd tuned out, a cost he'd chalked up to justice. Now, Nia's voice echoed in his skull. "This isn't justice, it's a setup." And Darnell's wide, pleading eyes blurred with Jamal's, a ghost clawing out of a grave Grayson had buried deep. He'd find Nia for her cross, a petty flex to assert control, and she'd turned it into a mirror, reflecting a man he no longer recognized, a man complicit in a machine he'd never dared to see. He downed the scotch, the burn sharp and fleeting, and slammed the file shut, guilt gnawing at him like a rat in the walls of his mind, a sensation alien to a life built on certainty and rules. Wednesday dawned with the fight spilling into the streets, Jamal's case a spark igniting dry grass across Shelby County. By 9 a.m., a crowd gathered outside the courthouse, 50 souls swelling to 100, then 200. Black mothers clutching signs scrawled with "Stop the setup," young men chanting "No justice, no peace," in a rhythm that pulsed through the humid air. Pastors and callers calling for accountability with voices honed by Sunday sermons. Sarah's story hit the Murfreesboro Dispatch online at 8 o'clock. Courtroom chaos, attorney exposes cops' lies. Photos of Nia's wrecked car, Bobby Ray's flinch under the gallery's glare, and a sidebar on Pruitt's 6 complaints lighting up screens across the region. Social media caught fire. Onefu's Justice for Jamal trending by mid-morning. Clips of the gallery's uproar looping on X. Each retweet a match struck against Langston's empire. Nia arrived at Justice Now by 10 stow, her car still in the shop, an Uber dropping her at the squat brick building on Beale Street, where her non-profit clung to life. Inside, Denise met her at the door, a stack of audit notices clutched in her hands, her grim nod a soldier's salute to a brewing war. "They're coming tomorrow, full team from state revenue. We're drowning in this, Nia," she said, voice rough with fatigue. Nia scanned the papers, her jaw tightening as she read the demands. Every tax record since 2015, every grant application, every donor receipt, an expedited probe with no precedent. "They're fishing," she said, eyes narrowing. "Looking for anything to shut us down, bleed us dry. We need to counter, hard." She called a meeting in the nonprofit's cramped conference room, 6 staffers, a mix of lawyers and paralegals, crowding around a table that smelled of stale coffee and desperation, their faces etched with the strain of too many cases and too little funding. "We're under attack," Nia said, standing at the head, her voice steady as a general rallying troops before a siege. "Langston's behind it, the car, this audit, all of it. He's hitting us where it hurts because we hit him first. We fight back with what we've got. Records, transparency, the truth. Prep every file, every receipt. Leave no crack for them to exploit. And we keep working. Jamal's win is just the start, not the end. Outside, the protests grew, 300 strong by noon, horns honking in a defiant chorus, megaphones blaring as the crowd swelled into a river of resistance. Reverend Jeremiah Hayes, a wiry pastor with a voice like rolling thunder, took the mic on the courthouse steps, his collar stark against his dark suit. "They vandalized her car 'cause she spoke up," he roared, fist raised. "They audit her work 'cause she won't shut up. This ain't just Nia Caldwell's fight. It's ours. Every last one of us who's been stepped on by this system." The crowd erupted, a wave crashing against the shore of power, their chants. "Justice now!" echoing off the brick walls, a sound that shook the ground beneath Langston's invisible throne. Langston watched from his pawnshop office, a small TV tuned to a local news feed flickering with images of the swelling protests, his bourbon glass empty on the desk, its contents spilled in a moment of rare distraction. Ronnie Tate called at 1 p.m., his voice smug over the crackling line. "Found something, Vic. Nonprofit's got a client, ex-con named Terrell Jones. Beat a drug rap last year, but he's dirty. Dealing again, I'd bet my left hand. We lean on him, he flips, says Caldwell fudged his case to get him off. Muddy her up good, make her look crooked." Langston's lips curled, a rare smile slicing through his usual mask of cold calculation. "Do it," he said, hanging up with a snap, his mind already spinning the threads of his next move. He dialed Pruitt next, voice smooth and lethal. "Crowd's getting loud out there. Too loud. Push back, arrest a few, scare the rest off. Keep it messy, keep 'em running." Pruitt grunted assent, his squad already rolling out in riot gear, batons gleaming under the midday sun. By 2 p.m., the streets turned ugly, cops clashing with protesters in a haze of tear gas that curled into the air like venomous smoke, arrests piling up as batons met flesh and voices met silence. Nia watched from Justice Now's office window, her fists clenched tight enough to leave crescent marks in her palms, her phone buzzing with texts from Jamal. "They're fighting for me out there, Aunt Nia. I can't believe it." She texted back, fingers steady despite the knot in her chest. "Stay safe, Jamal. This is bigger now, bigger than us." Grayson saw it too, locked in his chambers, the TV flickering with images of chaos he'd unwittingly unleashed. His phone rang at 2:15. Langston's number flashing, a call he'd dodged for years, but couldn't ignore now, not with the world crumbling around him. "Harold," Langston said, voice smooth as a blade sliding into flesh. "You let this get out of hand. She's got the streets, the press, and you're sitting there like a damn statue. Fix it or I will. Your bench won't save you." Grayson's throat tightened, his hand hovering over the Darnell Brooks file on his desk, its yellowed edges a ghost that had haunted him since Nia's stand cracked his world open. "I'm done fixing your messes," he rasped, voice raw with a defiance he hadn't felt since Nam, hanging up before Langston could reply. His hands shook, the scotch tumbler rattling against the desk, unsure if it was courage or collapse driving him, but the guilt was a tide he could no longer hold back. A flood of Darnell's sobs, Jamal's fear, Nia's unyielding truth washing over him. Nia didn't sleep that night, her kitchen table buried under audit prep, spreadsheets, receipts, donor logs, her mind a whirlwind of protests, vandalism, and Langston's looming shadow. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed, Sarah's name lighting the screen, her voice breathless with urgency. "Tyrell Jones, ex-client of yours from last year," she said, words tumbling fast. "Langston's got him on a leash, wants him to lie, say you rigged his drug case to get him off. It's a smear, Nia, but I've got proof he's clean. Parole records, his PO's word, and a tape. Tyrell's cousin caught Ronnie Tate offering cash on recorder. It's Langston's voice, clear as hell. He's desperate, scrambling." Nia's eyes hardened, the cross cold against her skin, a chill that steadied her resolve. "Thanks, Sarah," she said, voice firm despite the hour. "Send me the tape. We're ready." She hung up, staring into the dark, the fight now hers, the community's, Grayson's to face. And Langston wouldn't win, not this time, not with her holding the proof that could topple his throne. Thursday broke over Memphis with a bruised gray sky, the air thick with the promise of rain at 7 a.m. Make a storm brewing over a city teetering on the edge of upheaval. Nia Caldwell stood at her kitchen window, her chipped mug of tea cold in her hands. Steam long dissipated as she watched the silhouettes of protesters still holding ground downtown. Fewer now, their numbers whittled by exhaustion and arrests, but unyielding, their sodden signs swaying in the drizzle like battle flags. The past 48 hours had been a relentless gauntlet. Jamal Turner's courtroom victory, her car's brutal vandalism, the state audit strangling justice now, and the protests that had turned Shelby County into a war zone of defiance and tear gas. Victor Langston's shadow loomed larger with every strike, Pruitt's planted witness, the audit's suffocating grip, the smear campaign brewing with Tyrell Jones. But Nia gripped the USB drive Sarah Hensley had sent her, a recording of Langston's voice that felt like a loaded gun in her hand, her resolve forged in Mobile's dirt lanes and tempered by Marcus's ghost and Ruth's unbreakable spirit. Her phone lay silent on the table, its screen dark after Sarah's 3:08 a.m. Call, Tyrell Jones was clean, his parole record spotless. Langston's attempt to smear her a desperate lie caught on tape by Tyrell's cousin. Nia's eyes traced the dawn's faint light filtering through the drizzle, her mind a battlefield of strategy and weariness. The cross at her neck, a cold anchor against her skin. She hadn't slept, her kitchen table buried under audit prep. Spreadsheets, receipts, donor logs, a fortress of paper she'd built to protect justice now from Langston's chokehold. The state team was due at 9, but Sarah's tape was her ace, a blade to cut through the bureaucratic noose and strike at the heart of Langston's empire. He'd thought he could bury her, silence her fight. Now she'd bury him. At 8:30 a.m., Harold Grayson sat in his chambers, the courthouse a hollow shell around him, its silence a suffocating weight on his chest. His robe hung on the rack like a discarded skin, his suit rumpled from a night spent pacing the mausoleum of his office, law books lining the walls like tombstones, a faded Vietnam flag drooping in the corner, a photo of his father glaring from the shelf with unyielding judgment. The tumbler of scotch from last night sat empty, its burn a faint echo in his throat, his glasses smudged with fingerprints he hadn't bothered to clean. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, his hands trembling as he opened the Darnell Brooks file again. The 1995 case that had clawed its way out of the grave Nia's stand had unearthed. Darnell's photo stared back. 17, wide-eyed, a kid who'd begged for mercy. Grayson hadn't given, sentenced to 2 years for a stereo theft on flimsy evidence. Langston's whisper in his ear, "Order, Harold, nip it." He'd buried the doubt, kept his bench, but now Nia's voice, "This isn't justice, it's a setup," blurred Darnell's face with Jamal's, a ghost he couldn't silence. The TV flickered in the corner, muted, showing the protests, hundreds still chanting "Justice now" through the drizzle, a tide Grayson couldn't stem, a reckoning he'd unleashed by finding Nia's cross and losing control. Langston's call at 2:15 the previous day, "Fix it or I will," had snapped the last chain. "I'm done," he'd rasped, hanging up, his hands shaking with a defiance he hadn't felt since NAM. At 1 p.m., he walked into the courthouse lobby, robe off, suit crumpled, face a map of exhaustion and resolve. The clerk gasped, "Judge," but he waved her off, heading for the press room, a small, wood-paneled space where Sarah and a dozen reporters waited, cameras rolling like executioners' eyes. He stepped to the mic, voice hoarse but steady, a man stepping off a ledge into freefall. "I'm Judge Harold Grayson," he said, the room hushing, lenses zooming tight. "For 32 years, I've presided over this court, swore to uphold justice. I've failed. Victor Langston, businessman, fixer, held sway over me, over this court, for decades. He pushed cases, bent rulings, kept me in line with whispers and threats. Darnell Brooks, 1995, 2 years for a theft he didn't commit, was one of many. I took his orders, called it order. It was corruption, raw, deliberate, systemic. The room exploded, gasps, shouts, shutters clicking like gunfire. Sarah's pen flew, eyes wide as Grayson pressed on, hands gripping the podium. Nia Caldwell exposed it. She fought for Jamal Turner, and I tried to silence her, find her for a cross I mocked. She didn't bend. She showed me justice. I'm stepping down today. I'll testify. Langston, Pruitt, the whole damn system. It ends now." He walked out, the room a chaos of questions, his career ash at his feet. the confession hitting the wires like a bomb, detonating Langston's empire in real time. Langston saw it at 1:15, his TV blaring Grayson's words in his pawnshop office, the bourbon glass slipping from his hand to shatter on the floor, amber shards glinting like broken promises. "Traitor!" he snarled, hands shaking, his ledger useless now, a relic of a reign unraveling. Pruitt called at 1:20, panic choking his voice over the line. "Vic, they're coming. Cops, feds, everyone." Grayson singing like a damn bird. Langston hung up, mind scrambling, but the door burst open at 1:25. FBI agents in dark jackets, warrants in hand, voices barking. "Victor Langston, you're under arrest. Bribery, obstruction, evidence tampering." Cuffs snapped around his wrists, his empire crumbling as agents rifled through ledgers, the pawn shop a tomb for his fallen kingdom. Nia faced the state revenue team at 2 p.m., 3 suits in Justice Now's cramped conference room, their briefcases open, their faces blank as they sifted through tax records with mechanical precision. Denise stood beside her, laptop streaming Grayson's confession live, the room silent but for the hum of truth breaking through. "That's your boss," Nia said, pointing at the screen, voice a blade cutting through their bureaucratic armor. "Langston's done, arrested 10 minutes ago. Pruitt's done. You've got nothing? Drop this audit or I'll sue for harassment, and this tape," she held up the USB, "will be Exhibit 1, Langston's voice bribing a witness to smear me. Hargrove, the lead auditor, stared, face ashen, his sneer dissolving as he nodded, packing up without a word. The audit died in that moment, Justice Now exhaled. But Nia's fight wasn't over. Victory was a step, not the end. At 3:00 p.m., she stood before the protesters. 600 strong now, a sea of faces, signs, and hope spilling across Beale Street. Their voices a roar that drowned out the drizzle. Reverend Jeremiah Hayes handed her the megaphone, his eyes shining with pride and weariness. "Speak, sister," he said, stepping back. Nia took it, her gray blouse soaked, her voice steady despite the weight of sleepless nights, her silver cross catching the light like a beacon. "I'm Nia Caldwell," she said, the crowd hushing, 600 pairs of eyes locking onto her. "Jamal's free, Grayson's confessed, Langston's in cuffs. We won today. But it's bittersweet. My car's smashed, my work's been attacked, and too many, Marcus, Darnell, you, still carry scars this system carved into us. It's not over. They'll rebuild, rebrand, slink back unless we keep standing. Fight for your kids, your rights, your truth. Don't shrink, stand tall. Don't whisper, speak loud. This is our call. Justice now, justice always." The crowd erupted, a wave breaking, tears and cheers mingling in a cacophony of defiance and relief. Jamal pushed through, sobbing as he hugged her. "You did it, Aunt Nia." She held him tight, victory heavy with its costs, sleepless nights, a fractured car, a non-profit bruised but breathing. At dusk, Nia sat alone in her kitchen, the silence a stark contrast to the day's roar, the cross warm against her skin from her touch. Grayson's fall was redemption, Langston's arrest a win, but Marcus's ghost whispered through the quiet, "It's not enough." She nodded to the empty air, a vow renewed. Langston was down, but the system lingered, a hydra with heads still sprouting. The fight endured, bittersweet and unbroken, hers to carry forward.